Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, a special Independence Day edition. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Well, Bob, thank you very much for that introduction on this 4th of July. In the year 2017, it is a pleasure to be on the air. It's a pleasure to be able to chat with you on this Independence Day and to join our listeners and our folks who, many of them are off today, obviously celebrating a holiday. I guess it's probably the end of a long weekend for a lot of folks. The holidays seem to extend. In fact, I heard somebody raised a thing yesterday and said, if the 4th of July comes on a Wednesday next year, what do? Cancel the week? But I think when you get to Wednesday, it just becomes a day again. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be here on this second day of broadcasting in this week early in July. It is a pleasure, and I hope that everybody is enjoying the 4th and spending a little bit of time thinking about the meaning of the 4th. I know I have, and I've been doing quite a bit of reading today. That, as one would expect, if you begin to scour the media outlets on this Independence Day, you begin to find a number of people who have taken the opportunity to put together something that's very, very appropriate on this special day, and it's hard to believe, you know. I remember the bicentennial so well in 1976, for example. I remember that so well. I remember teaching in Canada that summer, the summer of 1976. And I can, 200th anniversary, and now here we are, the 241st anniversary today. And I think, my heavens, that was 41 years ago. It's hard to believe that 40 years has passed since then, but that, I guess I'm going through an exercise that a lot of people go through. I think we do it more and more and more as we get older. Welcome to the Virtual Center. I do thank you for your continued support of this program. And I also thank you for your continued support for the Head On Radio Network. I know that I speak for Bob and Annette and the folks at Head On who really appreciate the continued support that the network receives from our listeners. And we've talked before about how there's no advertising budget, there's no advertising money coming in. Basically, the money that comes in is the money that those people who support the program, who listen to the programs, are willing to part with in order to keep programming like this on the air. It's very important. I think all of us would agree with that. And I just want to, on this Independence Day, thank all of you for your continued support. I know Bob, I know mine does. His head reels when he appreciates the number of years that he's been able to do this, the number of years that listeners have sustained this effort. And I think he's to be credited because he's not given up an inch in terms of putting everything he's got into the quality of programming on this network. I think obviously it's very obvious for the fact that that folks have supported him for this long, that they recognize the effort and the commitment and the passion that he puts into these programs. And I just want to thank him, and I want to thank all of you for your continued support of his efforts, of my efforts here. I know that at this point in my life, my professional life, I never dreamed that I would be involved in something like this. It's something that a lot of people that I've known over the years dream about doing. And the fact that I've been able to do it, and the fact that it has renewed me and got me back to the sources in ways that I never expected to do. I have this program, this whole initiative, Bob and his folks, to thank for it. And on this Independence Day, I do want to do that. So thank you all very, very much for your continued support. We'd love to hear from you on this Independence Day. We know there are some folks out there that might be listening live today that don't usually get the opportunity to do that. And if you'd like to identify yourselves or just make yourself known and let us know you're out there and share with us some of your thoughts on some of the programs we've done and some of the issues we raised, we'd love to hear from you on this Independence Day. Bob is in the studio at the Head On Radio Network, and if you call, he'll receive your call, and we'll get you on the air very, very quickly. The phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you're a little bit reluctant about going on the air, but at the same time you've got something you would really like to share with our listeners, I know that they would appreciate hearing from it, and I would be glad to do all I can to get it on the air for you. If you drop me an email, I'd be glad to share your thoughts, your concerns, whatever, with our listeners. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And for the better part now of close to a year, I would guess, maybe a little bit longer than that, we've had our Facebook page. I'm getting notices from Facebook. For those of you who do Facebook regularly, you know what I'm talking about. The folks at Facebook remind us every year that it's been a year or 2 years or however long that we've been friends on Facebook with particular people that we regularly communicate with. And I've been getting notices about people that I've been Facebooking now for 2 years. And so that, to me, indicates that I was on Facebook for several months before we put together a Facebook page for the Virtual Center. So my guess is that if I've been doing Facebook myself for a couple of years, it's probably half of that or maybe a little bit more than that we've had our Facebook page. It's probably a year and a couple of months, something like that. But I do encourage you to check out our Facebook page. There are a number of postings there. I mentioned yesterday that I hadn't put anything on Facebook for several days and that I would try to rectify that before we came on the air again today, and I've done that. This morning I posted two things. One is a link to an article, which I'll make reference to in a moment. The other one is a piece that I've been working on for the last week or so, rather intensively. I apologize for its length, but it dawned on me as we were getting close to airtime today that I had committed yesterday to the fact that I would put something from this effort or this initiative on my part on the Facebook page today. And without taking the time to do any editing, I thought, well, I'll just kind of put up there what I've got. And so that's what I did. I put it on about an hour before we went on the air. It's about just a little over an hour ago. And I introduced it by saying this is an essay without a title. And I'm really looking for reaction and feedback. And if people want to suggest a title, I had to give it some sort of a name in order to keep bringing up the rough copy on my computer. So I gave it the name, and I called it Divisions in History. And what I've basically found myself doing is opening with comment about an issue that I think is very, very real today and very, very negative, very dangerous today in our society. And this is the idea of separation or distrust living in a kind of an us versus them world and looking at other people as not potential friends but potential enemies. not for potential positives, but for prospective negatives. This kind of an attitude, which I think is more and more pervading our society, is very negative. It's affecting our politics. It's affecting our economics. It's affecting our role in international affairs. It's affecting the way others throughout the world look at us. It's the way we look at people who are different than we are. I think the issue has ramifications and problems written all over it in a number of different directions. And so that's what I've been doing. And then I found myself going back in history and trying to pick up on the origins with this idea, where did these things come from? And I started to just spend some time reflecting and doing a little bit of research. I would think of something and go back and look up the original and go back to it and maybe quote a line or two from an original source. It ended up being much longer than I anticipated it would be. And obviously, if I'm going to do anything with it, I'm going to have to refine it quite a bit and shorten it. I know that. But I'm at the point right now where I really need to find a way to bring it to a meaningful conclusion. And that's what I'm kind of looking for some assistance with. I'm hoping that I get some reactions and some ideas or whatever. And, of course, one of the reactions should be this whole idea doesn't need to be talked about at all. Drop it. You know, that could be one of the suggestions I receive. I don't know. But anyway, I did put something on Facebook. It's rather long, and all I did was say that I appreciate people taking the time to look at it and if they so choose to react to it. So again, I do encourage you to frequent our Facebook page. I for the most part, I've done a lot better as time has gone on in updating materials on our Facebook page. If you are a user of Facebook, you know how easy it is. Just go to the homepage, which is facebook.com. And in the search box at the top, if you type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you'll be onto our Facebook page here. And you'll see the postings, the two postings that I put on there this morning, and then the ones that were already on there from last week. So, again, I encourage you to do that. I thank you for doing that. And I hope you will feel comfortable commenting on what's there and letting me know your reactions. Most of what I put on there solicits your reactions. I mentioned that I would mention briefly the piece the link that I put on there this morning. It's an article from today's Washington Post. And the author of the article is a political scientist from Harvard. Her name is Danielle Allen. Now, we've looked at some of Danielle's material before. She's a regular contributor to the Washington Post. And about a year ago, she wrote a book on the Declaration of Independence that received a lot of very positive response. And basically, her book was very, very basic. And what she did is go back to the Declaration of Independence and talk about the fact that everybody claims that they read it, but in fact, how many really have? And so what she does is take it through the Declaration and do a very, very tight, close textual analysis of some of the things that are in there. She really turns the Declaration into a teaching document and does a great job with it and has gotten a number of very positive responses for that effort. And since then, she has written several pieces commenting on issues of the day. And, of course, today is Independence Day, the celebration of the 4th of July, celebration of American independence. And so when I saw in there that Danielle Allen had an article in the Washington Post, I felt compelled, obviously, to read it. It was ironic because it is so timely and so appropriate for us here in southern West Virginia. We have, and when I say we, West Virginia Democrats have scheduled a meeting for this coming Saturday in the southern part of West Virginia, in the 1st Congressional District. We have 3 congressional districts in West Virginia, and the district in the southern part of the state is the 1st District, and that's where I am. So Democrats in that district have a meeting this Saturday, and the goal is to try to come up with mission statements and an agenda or goals that the party would use in order to build support for what we hope will be a major turnaround in West Virginia politics. West Virginia has become a red state, without question. And it is a state which Democrats controlled for many years. 83 years, I believe, the West Virginia Democratic Party controlled the West Virginia legislature. But in the last couple of rounds, the last couple of elections, Democrats have seen that overwhelming majority disappear to the point that now the House is under Republican control. It has been since for the last couple of cycles. The Senate has reverted to Republican control. And one of the things that is motivating us is the fact that we believe that we're still close enough in the Senate to perhaps retake it. And so that's an immediate goal. But more important, the goal of this meeting is to try to put our heads together and come up with something that is positive, that gives people in West Virginia something to support the Democratic Party for, rather than be a party that's running against Donald Trump or the Republican ideology or any of that stuff. We really kind of are committed to the idea that this party needs something to be for, something to be positive about. And lo and behold, in this morning's Washington Post, Danielle Allen writes exactly the same sentiments for the National Democratic Party. In fact, the photo she uses is one of Chuck Schumer, minority leader of the Democrats in the United States Senate. And she does the same thing and points out that the day we celebrate today, Independence Day, 241 years ago, Congress was a place of optimism. Congress was a place that was building something on the 4th of July in 1776. A committee was working on a document that would become the Articles of Confederation. Jefferson was a member of a 5-person committee that had just come back from working on a document that becomes the Declaration of Independence. People were optimistic and positive and enthusiastic. Obviously, Americans were frightened. They were scared because in declaring their independence, Americans were putting themselves at war with the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. And they knew that. The leaders of it knew that they were identifying themselves as traitors to the king, to Great Britain, to the empire. So this was very serious stuff, but it was a period of optimism. It was a period of building. And what Danielle Allen points out is that National Democrats need to basically take themselves by the neck right now and do the same thing. It's time Democrats came together and gave people something to be for, an agenda around which people could rally. And instead of constantly reacting to negatives from the White House and from the Senate and other things, it's important that Democrats tell the American people what they're about, what makes Democrats Democrats, and what kind of an agenda, a kind of an action type of an agenda, Democrats would like to endorse. It just, for me, seems so timely because that's exactly what we're scheduled to do here in this part of West Virginia on Saturday. And following that introduction, Danielle Allen says, "This is the speech I'd like to hear from the leadership of the Democratic Party. And, of course, she puts Chuck Schumer's picture there. And it deals with things like health care, leadership in the world, jobs, education, access to quality medical care for all, rebuilding our infrastructure, creating meaningful jobs, putting people to work, giving people a feeling of pride in what America stands for, touching base again with some of the values and some of the things that over the years made America such a mecca for people throughout the world who wanted to improve their lives. We've got a lot going for us, she felt. And it's time leaders of the Democratic Party began to step up and assume the kind of leadership that the nation seems to be in need of. So I put that link on our Facebook page this morning, along with the opening paragraph that Danielle Allen includes. And I can share that with you because I have a copy of it right here. Her opening paragraph, I said, speaks directly to Democrats here in West Virginia. And this is a quote. By now, she says, we should all be bored to death with despairing Democrats decrying the non-appeal of their brand. If they remembered that we were citizens, not consumers, they might bother to develop some ideas and propose to lead us somewhere, anywhere. Perhaps the anti-Trump resistance could tackle the challenge of building a positive vision. Resist and rebuild, she said, might be the mantra. And then she goes on and addresses the speech that she'd like to hear coming from Democrats on the national level. I think it's worth reading, and I didn't get into all the details. I'm not going to summarize the article and talk about the issues because I think most of us could probably anticipate what they are. But it's worthwhile looking at what she says, the position that she advocates Democrats taking on some of these issues. I think she's right. I know when I ran locally for the legislature last fall, that was my position. Democrats needed to give people a reason to vote for us. Not because we're the other guys from the guys that are in power now and doing all these bad things. That's not enough. People need to know what you stand for. They need to be optimistic. They need to become excited. They need to become enthused and positive. And that's what I think this initiative is about. So I would encourage all of you, if you get the chance, to go to the Washington Post and look up Danielle Allen's article for yourself, or go to the Virtual Center Facebook page and just click on the link that I've put there to this particular article. I think you'll appreciate it. I think you'll find it very, very positive. And in this July 4th, it seems to me that that's an issue that all of us, just feeling positive and feeling good again, it seems to me is a very important thing as we enter this, the middle of the summer of 2017 by celebrating Independence Day. I had mentioned at the end of our program yesterday, for those of you who were listening, that we would return to the topic at the beginning of today's program that we closed yesterday's program with, and that hopefully by that time people might have had a little bit of time to reflect and think about some of the ingredients, some of the contents of the article we looked at yesterday related to the threat of what we call artificial intelligence. AI for short. I think more and more we're seeing people writing about and talking about artificial intelligence. And we're going to see references to something called AI. And that's what it is. Yesterday, in the second hour of our program, we devoted that portion of our program to an article that appeared in a week ago Sunday's New York Times by a gentleman from China named Kai-Fu Lee, who is an authority on artificial intelligence and the growing influence of artificial intelligence in China. His article, it goes way beyond China, however. It deals with the threat, the real threat, that artificial intelligence poses to today's world. And he begins his article, and this is going to be a very short summary, but he begins his article by telling us what artificial intelligence is not. And he said, while many people fear artificial intelligence because they really worry about the day when we will develop computer software programs that so outperform the ability of human beings to keep up, that in effect, the technology will take control of us and we'll lose our ability to control it. That science fiction approach to a concern about artificial intelligence, Lee says, is a long way off, if ever, because as potent and powerful as artificial intelligence promises to be, there are certain things that it cannot do, that it shows little promise of being able to do, things that only human beings can do. And that is to exude things like sympathy, caring, to express or deal with knowledge in multiple domains at the same time, to shift gears from one subject or one topic or one perspective to another. That technology doesn't show much promise of ever being able to do. So in that sense, then, Lee says, we really don't have all that much to fear about artificial intelligence in that area. But that doesn't mean that artificial intelligence doesn't pose problems for the world. And then he goes in to discuss what he believes is the real danger of artificial intelligence, which is its ability to take over so many of our jobs that it threatens to render huge portions of the world's population unemployable. And while his solution would seem to be that what education and training needs to focus on are the areas that artificial intelligence is weak on, areas that it can't do, jobs that it can never replace. Lee points out that in reality, most of these jobs in today's world are low-paying jobs. The high-paying jobs, even the ones that artificial intelligence might be able to do, don't give us much hope because it's going to be very, very difficult to take displaced people in the numbers that we're going to have to deal with it and re-educate them or retrain them in some of these more challenging areas, which are the high-paying professions that exist now, things like trial lawyers and things like that. The fact of the matter is, what we're going to have to do is focus on the things that artificial intelligence can't do, which are those areas that emphasize what we call sometimes today the soft skills, the skills of feeling and compassion and assistance and customer service and human service, one-on-one kinds of service. mentoring, for example, young people, assisting elderly people, volunteering in nursing homes and hospitals and hospice establishments and things like that. Unfortunately, he points out, these are the jobs that in today's world don't pay much. Social work, for example. We see large numbers of people going into social work because there are jobs there. But the fact of the matter is they aren't very well paying jobs. So the reality is that what we are doing then in order to counter artificial intelligence, we're going to have to educate or re-educate and train people in areas which don't pay a whole heck of a lot. In fact, these are areas now where a lot of people trust to volunteerism, to volunteers to do a lot of these things. So what we're in a sense talking about is paying people in huge numbers for jobs that we currently don't pay for at all or pay very little for. And so the next question that Lee raises is, where's that money going to come from? And his answer is, it's got to come from the huge fortunes that those corporations, those companies that are big into artificial intelligence are going to make. Lee points out that one of the negative outcomes of artificial intelligence is going to be an increase, a dangerous increase in inequality in the world. Small numbers of organizations that are able to buy heavily into artificial intelligence are going to command huge profits. So what we're going to see, all things being equal, is a situation where a few large organizations are going to dominate control of the world's wealth. Not only that, but those organizations are going to be focused or based principally in only two countries. Because right now it looks like the United States and China are the two nations where artificial intelligence is showing the most promise. And if things continue to go in the direction that they are going in, we're looking at a world which is going to be dominated by the United States and China, because they are going to control the kind of technological access in the area of artificial intelligence, which is going to bring them control of the bulk of the nation's wealth. What that means is people and nations throughout the world are going to become dependent on these nations, on these supranations, which means that a massive redistribution of wealth is going to have to happen. Governments are going to have to tax profit, tax wealth at levels never seen before, because literally this wealth will be redistributed throughout the world in order to pay for the work that people need to be doing in order that they can feel fulfilled. The problem is huge. The implications of it, I think, are incredible. The way that the author explains this and I think he does a great job with it, is as follows about the United States and China dominating. And this is the way he explains it. The more data you have, the better your product. This is going to be in the age of artificial intelligence, the age of data collection on a massive scale. The more data you have, the better your product. The better your product, the more data you can collect. The more data you can collect, the more talent you can attract. The more talent you can attract, the better your product. It's a vicious circle, he says, and the United States and China have already amassed the talent, market share, and data to set the process in motion. And then he talks about the role of the United States taking a leadership role in driverless automobiles. Companies like Google and Tesla and Uber. But then he also talks about Chinese speech recognition company Flytek and Chinese face recognition companies like Megville and SenseTime, which have become industry leaders, he said. And it's beginning to look like major organizations, and he names them: Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. These companies are the ones making extensive use of artificial intelligence. These are the companies that are expanding their operations into other countries. These are the companies or the operations that essentially own artificial intelligence markets already. Ultimately, he says that what we face now, is the need to rethink economic inequality in the world on a global scale. His last sentence is disturbing. These challenges are too far-ranging in their effects, he says, for any nation to isolate itself from the rest of the world. Basically, then, what he's talking about is a world that will become very interdependent. Most nations are going to be dependent on one of the artificial intelligence superpowers, be it China or the United States. And so, in essence, I think it seems like what Lee is projecting here is a challenge that the world needs to confront, not just one nation in that world, but a nation that the entire world needs to confront. Well, we've seen the entire world efforts to confront the issues of climate change. And we've recently seen the United States pull out of that effort. And I think all of us need to appreciate that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't believe in this country, we don't believe the climate threat is a threat. I think the implication of all of this is there's a belief that we can get the benefits of being a member of this international effort without being a member. That, in other words, because of our influence, size, power, and wealth, we can remain on the outside and continue to be effective in the efforts of the world. I would point out that that is exactly the same perspective, the same philosophy that the United States believed at the end of World War I, when the United States Senate made the decision to not become a party to the League of Nations, not to join. It wasn't that we didn't endorse or support the goals of the League. We just felt like we could enjoy those goals, those benefits, without the negatives associated with membership. I think that's probably the same thinking that's prevailing today. But the fact of the matter is, this artificial intelligence threat is a real one, and the way Lee explains it it seems to project challenges which, to be very honest, seem to be totally alien or contradictory to the direction that the United States is going in right now. This morning, this afternoon, but before we came on the air today, I had turned on the television just to kind of catch up, see if there was any breaking news, so to speak. And I happened to see, and this was interesting, it was on Fox, the results of an internal survey suggested, according to Fox, I mean, this was one of the streams, one of the banners that was running on the bottom of the screen, that this internal survey seemed to suggest that a significant majority of the American people believed that this American initiative coming out of the White House to make America first was the right way to go, was the direction that we ought to be following. I think President Trump has successfully been able to associate his predecessor, President Obama, with an effort to try to become one of many in a united world. President Obama, for example, was very, very concerned about the need for nations to cooperate with each other against ISIS, against climate change. In the area of trade, he was advocating, for example, the Pacific Partnership, a trade organization which would dominate the Far East. And President Trump has obviously made it an agenda priority to undo much of what President Obama tried to do and stood for. I can't help but thinking a lot of this is personal, but that's another issue. But the fact of the matter is, according to this survey that Fox News is talking about today, a significant portion of the American people believe that President Trump is on the right track. This go-it-alone approach is the right way to go, emphasizing nationalism and our own national goals rather than global ones, rather than international ones. The reality then is that the direction we are going in right now is the exact opposite of the ones that Lee projects the world must take in order to successfully confront the challenges of artificial intelligence. That's one issue. It seems to me, and these are just thoughts that I had, another issue that I think is very significant is the issue of inequality. Not only the issue of wealth inequality in our own nation, but now we're talking about an extreme level of inequality in the world's distribution of wealth. It is extremely optimistic and idealistic to believe that nations of the world are going to accept this inequality as being something they can't do anything about, and therefore are going to put aside the nationalism and the competitiveness that drives all nations in favor of the kind of cooperation and unification that will be necessary in order to address the potential problems of inordinate inequality in wealth among nations. The very fact that you have a situation where the many are so dependent on the few from a global perspective, it seems to me, from the history that I know, is fodder for disaster, not cooperation. The other thing I think we need to consider in Lee's projections is the nature of the bipolar world that he projects with artificial intelligence. In effect, he's projecting a world that artificial intelligence will create for us that's very, very similar to the Cold War world dominated by two superpowers in the late 20th century, the United States and the Soviet Union. And of course, the reality is that neither of those two superpowers ever reached the point of moving beyond the Cold War. Each of them felt the need to overwhelm the other. There was not even the beginnings or a hint of the idea that these nations together could jointly manage the world in a way which would benefit everybody. Yet that's the model that Lee is projecting here. I just personally don't believe that it's one we can end up being too comfortable with. Basically, then, it seems to me, my reaction to Lee's article is to consider the threats that he sees coming, but more importantly, spend time coming up with alternative solutions to those threats rather than blindly buying into the solution that he projects. It just seems to me that the history of the world up to this point doesn't make what he projects must happen likely to happen. Obviously, I would be very, very interested in your reactions to this. Yesterday, at the end of the program, I made sure that everybody had the link. Everybody had access to this article so that they could read it, think about it ahead of today, with the idea that they would have an opportunity, that all of us would have an opportunity to react to it, either on the air, while the program is on the air, or on Facebook, or in emails, or whatever people might choose as the best way to react. But I think it's a significant challenge. It's a significant issue. It's one that all of us need to recognize and think very seriously about, because it's one that all of us will be facing in the not too distant future. In fact, we're facing some elements of that right now in terms of job displacement. Lee points out in his article, I didn't make mention of this today, although I did yesterday, that the difference between this particular revolution, internet revolution or communication revolution, and the previous revolutions that have preceded it, like the Industrial Revolution, is the total difference in the concept of job replacement. The Industrial Revolution displaced jobs, eliminated jobs, but it replaced them with new jobs, and it created opportunities for training and education to prepare people for new jobs that were constantly being created as others were being eliminated. What makes this particular revolution unique and different is that the jobs being displaced, being destroyed, are not being replaced by new ones. In a sense, artificial intelligence is rapidly making man useless, to quote Richard Sennett's writings from the 1980s. We spent quite a bit of time with Richard Sennett on the new capitalism and the challenges of the new capitalism. I think this issue of artificial intelligence is not going to go away. We're talking about it. We're reading about it more and more all the time. All of us, for example, have been confronted with the purchase of Whole Foods by Amazon less than 2 weeks ago, and what that might mean for the food industry in this country. That's but the beginning of a trend that I think Lee accurately points out is a real one, and one all of us need to take very, very seriously and prepare for. That's one of the reasons I wanted to present it on this particular program. We're now about 20 minutes after the hour, so we've got probably 40 minutes to go before we go off the air today. This is Independence Day, and I did want to devote some program time to celebrate the day itself. As I mentioned, most major publications today are featuring contributions, articles on the issue of independence or the founders or whatever. It's that kind of a day. And one of the offerings that you might find very, very valuable in today's Washington Post is an article on what supposedly was the last letter that Thomas Jefferson ever wrote. It was written to the mayor of Washington, D.C., in preparation for the 4th of July, 1826. There were still 3 signers of the Declaration alive as of that particular July 4th celebration in 1826. Thomas Jefferson was 83 years old. John Adams was, I believe, 92 maybe, or 90 years old. And the third one was Charles Carroll of Carrollton, a representative in Maryland to the Continental Congress. Charles Carroll was 88 years old. And the mayor of Washington, while these last 3 signers were still alive, decided that he wanted to make this the 50th celebration of the original Declaration of Independence, something very special. So he invited each of these living signers to attend July 4th celebrations. Carroll and John Adams declined because of their health. Jefferson was the last one to respond. He was having terrible health problems, so he also declined to attend. But as the author of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson felt a responsibility to contribute something to the festivities. So he put pen to paper and wrote what many people believe to be his final letter. Turns out at the very end that the author tells us that actually this wasn't the last letter, that there were 2 more. And that the very last letter, I think very appropriately, was a wine order from Europe. Jefferson's last written piece was to order a shipment of wine. And of course, we know that Jefferson died on the 4th of July, the 50th 4th of July after the independence, 4th of July. And then this piece in the Washington Post pretty much captures the thrust of Jefferson's final letter. And of course, Jefferson makes a point of stressing the importance of this day and of celebrating this day. And he makes the point also that what the founders had in mind in 1776 was not only a nation conceived in freedom, but a nation dedicated to the idea that mankind is not born into a world where certain people are born more important than other people. That the vast majority of people are born to be servants of a very few who will have the power and the ability to ride herd over them. That's not what the Creator intended the world to be, Jefferson said. That's not what this nation was conceived to be. That's not what the Declaration of Independence was written to establish or to articulate. It's a very powerful piece, a very powerful letter. We spent a program some months ago on this particular letter, and I didn't want to go back through the whole letter and devote a significant amount of time to it again. But you can get the gist by going to today's Washington Post and looking up this article, the title of which addresses the fact that it's Jefferson's last letter, so to speak. In actuality, the author points out that it really isn't. There's another piece that appears in our nation's publications today, and this is the one that I would really like to draw your attention to on this particular day, this celebration of Independence Day. This one appears in the New York Times. It's written by two of the nation's most preeminent scholars on the founders and on Thomas Jefferson. It's co-written by Annette Gordon Reed, who's at Harvard, and has written a prize-winning book published in 2009 on Jefferson's relationship with Sally Hemings and the intellectual contradictions of Jefferson's life. It's a prize winner. I believe it won the Pulitzer Prize in 2009 for nonfiction. The co-author of today's article is Peter Onuf, O-N-U-F, who's a revolutionary scholar at the University of Virginia. And what these two scholars have done on this 2017 celebration of Independence Day is to address Jefferson's thinking on the issue of religious freedom. More specifically, on Jefferson's determination to separate the philosophy of Scripture from the mythology of Scripture. More particularly, Jefferson's initiative, which he took upon himself while he was President of the United States in 1804, Jefferson began to delete from the English, French, Latin, and Greek versions of the New Testament those elements or those issues included in the New Testament that we would say constituted happenings that we could classify as miracles. The mystical part, the magic part, those elements within the New Testament that one would have to believe totally by faith. Jefferson's goal was to put together what he called the life and morals of Jesus of Nazareth. And what these two authors address on this Independence Day is the common attitude that Jefferson was so critical of Christianity that he could be considered an atheist. And they go to great lengths, to point out that Jefferson is far from an atheist. Jefferson believed in a creator. Jefferson believed in the value and the importance of religion. Jefferson believed that religion was so important to people's lives that he felt it necessary to keep government out of that aspect of people's lives. And so therefore, he wanted to make sure that government was not able to interfere in people's religious thinking and people's religious preferences. That was up to them. It was their own doing. It was their own business. When asked throughout his life about his own religious preferences, Jefferson's response was usually, "My religion is my business." To a lot of people, this has meant that they believed Jefferson to be anti-religion, that maybe he didn't believe in God at all. Gordon Reed and Peter Onuf go to great lengths in this article to point out that that isn't true. But they also point out that Jefferson's political opponents were quick to use his thinking on religion against him for political reasons. They point out that Jefferson himself discovered how hard it was going to be to separate religion from politics when he ran for president in 1800. His advisors in the campaign of 1800 made it very clear that they recognized that Jefferson had what we call a religious problem, a religion problem. By the 90s, Jefferson had developed a reputation as a faithless philosopher, even an atheist, certainly not a Christian. This made it very difficult in this country to be elected to anything. Many people believed that Jefferson's atheism disqualified him from the presidency. And these authors go to great lengths to make the point that Jefferson was no atheist. Early on, as a young man, Jefferson became a deist. He embraced what we might call natural religion. He rejected conventional Christianity and the religious dogma that was associated with it. And it was at that point that he took on what these authors call a spiritual quest that focused his attention intensively on the New Testament. What he wanted to do, what Jefferson wanted to do, was to hear Jesus' original uncorrupted voice, imagining himself to be being personally taught by Jesus. If you got rid of all of the stuff that other people put in the New Testament, all the stuff about miracles, about resurrections from the dead, being swallowed by whales, and all of these other things, and you just focused on what Jesus had to say about people living together in peace, harmony, and love, Jefferson believed that Jesus would have a message that nobody in the world could reject. Thus, Jefferson became an advocate of separating the philosophy of Jesus from what he called the mystifications that offended him and his belief in science. In 1804, as I mentioned, Jefferson took a razor to the New Testament in order to construct a clear account of Jesus' original uncorrupted teachings. He didn't want to publicize his project, but according to Reed, in order to Gordon Reed and to Peter Onuf, Jefferson was confident that enlightened Republicans and conscientious Christians would agree on the fundamental ethical principles that he was able to glean from the Bible. It was later referred to as Jefferson's civil religion, the moral foundation of a truly free, united people. In 1904, this I did not know, I have to be honest. In 1904, Congress had the government printing office issue 9,000 copies of Jefferson's Bible for distribution among senators and congressmen. These authors point out that in today's world, this Congress would never do any such thing. That we live in a world today where people would be scandalized by what Jefferson tried to do. Scandalized that he would even believe that he could improve on the Bible. Basically, then, what these authors point to is Jefferson's idealistic vision of an American civil religion, the shared faith of a free people. And to be very honest, on this Independence Day celebration, these authors believe that Jefferson's ideas look pretty good. When you look around the world today and you see what horrible things people are doing to each other in the name of God, in the name of religion, it makes Jefferson's initiative look pretty noble and pretty significant. I have to say that I, for a long time, have been very much in this camp about Jefferson and religion. When I ran for the legislature last fall, I realized that I was running in a section of the country where religion was very important to a lot of people. To maybe sound crude about it, but I don't mean it that way. in a portion of the country which is hard put to put people to work to find jobs. We do not live in a portion of the country that is deficient in churches. They're everywhere in this region. I knew that an effort to run for public office in this region would at one point or the other touch religion. I felt very, very driven to take on the issue before it took me on, before people started to question or raise questions about my particular religious beliefs. I felt the need to get out there in public what I believed about religion, how I believed it related to politics. I believed that my religion was my business, along with Jefferson. I also believe, along with Jefferson, that religion is very important. I believe it's very private. I believe it's very personal. I believe it should stay that way. And I think the worst thing that people can do is question other people on the basis of their religion or lack of religion or different practices associated with their religion. Because in a sense, in doing so, you are tampering with their very freedom. This whole issue has brought me back to Jefferson. And it just so happens that in one of Jefferson's more prominent letters, a letter that he wrote in the year of the Constitutional Convention, right around the time the Constitutional Convention was scheduled to begin, specifically in April of 1787. Now that I say that, I was wrong, exactly. It was not April of 87, it was August of 87. The Constitutional Convention was well underway and was about a month from adjourning. The last day of the Constitutional Convention was September 17th. Jefferson wrote this letter on August 10th, 1787, to his nephew, Peter Carr. This is the letter. We've quoted it a number of times here on the Virtual Center. This is the letter where Jefferson raises the point about man's moral sense and raises the question that our Creator would have been a pitiful bungler if he had made rules for our moral conduct a matter of science, since so few of us are scientists. No, Jefferson believed and told his nephew, man was born to live in society with other men. Therefore, his morality was a key part of man's makeup. Jefferson says in this letter, man was endowed with a sense of right and wrong merely relative to this. This sense of right and wrong is as much a part of his nature as the sense of hearing, seeing, feeling. It is a true foundation of morality. This moral sense, or conscience, Jefferson said, is as much a part of man as his leg or his arm. Later on, he makes the point that this moral sense can be strengthened by exercise, just as one's legs and arms can be strengthened by exercise. And he encourages his nephew to live a life and do things which comprise such exercise. Jefferson says that his nephew should consider doing whatever he can to be charitable, humane, just, true, firm, orderly, and courageous. And he says, consider every act of this kind as an exercise which will strengthen your moral faculties and increase your worth as a person. Jefferson believed that each of us has a responsibility not only to recognize, honor, and respond to our moral sense, but to do everything we can to strengthen it. And this is what he advises his nephew in 1787. But then, in the next paragraph of the same letter, Jefferson addresses the issue of religion to his nephew. Basically, he said, you have reached the age where you now can confront issues. I can raise questions and issues with you that I really couldn't justly raise before. I'm reading, quote, directly from Jefferson's letter. Your reason is now mature enough to receive this object. In the first place, and Jefferson launches into a what you have to do scenario for his nephew on dealing with issues of religion. I think in light of this article today in the New York Times that we just looked at, I think what this letter does for me is reinforce what Gordon Reed and Peter Onuf are saying about Jefferson's commitment to the importance of religion. Jefferson says to his nephew, in the first place, divest yourself of all bias in favor of novelty and singularity of opinion. Get rid of all the beliefs. What you were taught was always true. What other people believe are true. Get rid of all of it. Divest yourself of all bias. Indulge these biases in any other subject rather than that of religion. It's too important. The consequences of error may be too serious. I want to read this sentence again. Divest yourself of all bias in favor of novelty and singularity of opinion. Indulge them in any other subject, but not religion. Religion is too important. The consequences of error may be too serious. Atheists don't write that. Atheists don't say that. People who write that to their nephew are people whose religious faith in the importance of understanding man's relationship to his God is so important that he wants you to get rid of everything that would interfere with the absolute truth. And what he's telling his nephew is, this isn't just another search for information. This is too serious. You can't afford to be wrong. He says, quote, fix reason firmly in her seat and call to her tribunal every fact every opinion. Question with boldness even the existence of a God. Because if there be one, he must more improve the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear. Another sentence that I think speaks reams that are important. Focus on religion. Rely on religion. Call on reason to assess every fact, every opinion. Question even the existence of God. Jefferson says, because if there be one, if there is a God, he'll more approve of reason than blinded fear. God is going to respect, if there is a God, he's going to respect man's application of reason to know that God than he is faith and all these things that people tell him to believe and tell him are true. In other words, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to be bold. Don't be afraid to confront the issue. Because what you're doing, even in the question of whether there is a God at all, is focusing on what God, if there is a God, would most value. You will naturally examine first the religion of your own country. Read the Bible then, as you would read Livy or Tacitus. The facts which are within the ordinary course of nature, you will believe on the authority of the writer, as you do those of the same kind in Livy and Tacitus. Don't read the words of Jesus as if they are the words of God. Read them as if they are the words of a thinker, of an important philosophical person like Livy or Tacitus. The source is important. But if you assume that source is God, then those words become more important than maybe they ought to be. The testimony of the writer weighs in their favor in one scale, and their not being against the laws of nature does not weigh against them. Consider what the sources say, what Jesus says, in light of what you know, the laws of nature, what makes sense and what doesn't. Those facts in the Bible which contradict the laws of nature, Jefferson says, must be examined with more care and under a variety of faces. Here you must recur to the pretensions of the writer for inspiration from God. Examine upon what evidence these pretensions are founded, and whether the evidence is so strong that its falsehood would be more improbable than a change of the laws of nature. For example, in the book of Joshua, we are told the sun stood still for several hours. Were we to read that in Livy or Tacitus, we would class it with their showers of blood, speaking of statues, beasts, etc. But it said the writer of that book was inspired. Examine, therefore, candidly what evidence there is of the author having been inspired. The pretension is entitled to your inquiry because millions believe it. On the other hand, yes, you're an astronomer enough to know how contrary it is to the law of nature that a body revolving on its axis as the Earth does should suddenly stop, should not by that sudden stoppage have prostrated animals, trees, buildings, and should after a certain time have resumed its revolution, and that without a second general prostration. Is this a rest of the earth's motion, or the evidence which affirms it most within the law of probabilities? In other words, weigh what Scripture says against what you know to be true or what you know to be possible. He's giving his advice to his nephew on how to investigate and find religious truths. Then he said, you will next read the New Testament. It's the history of a personage called Jesus. Keep in your mind the opposite pretensions of those who say he was begotten by God, born of a virgin, suspended and reversed the laws of nature at will, and ascended bodily into heaven. As opposed to those who say he was a man of illegitimate birth, a benevolent heart and enthusiastic mind, who set out without pretensions to divinity, ended in believing them, and was punished capitally for sedition, for breaking Roman law. These are the kinds of inquiries. I'm not going to finish this because we're approaching the end of our program. We've got about 2 minutes left. If you read this August 10th, 1787 letter from Thomas Jefferson to his nephew, Peter Carr, and read what he says about religion, you can conclude certain things about Jefferson and Jefferson's beliefs and thinking in the areas of religion. Jefferson was no atheist. In fact, Jefferson was more a believer and supporter of religion than many other people of his time. But Jefferson was a student, a product of the Enlightenment. Jefferson believed that it was man's mission to pursue truth, and that if there was a God, and Jefferson believed there was, that God gave man reason in order that man would use his reason to pursue truth. And that meant that you had to separate the philosophy from the mystification, from the fables, from the stories, from the miracles, if you will. Jefferson set out to do that. This is not the mission of somebody who is against religion or doesn't believe in God. Rather, it is the mission of one who seeks to know whether indeed there is a God or not. And he believes that in a free country, that ought to be everybody's prerogative. But when you reach a point where one person believes they are entitled or is able to impose their religious beliefs on others, you take away man's freedom to know God for himself. You deny man the possibility, as Madison said in his 1786 letter on religious freedom, his remonstrance. You deny men the same rights that you were able to enjoy when you pursued and found your own religious beliefs. You owe others the same right. This is not the action of somebody who is out to destroy religion. In fact, I would argue these are the actions of someone out to promote the importance and the value of religion in a free society. That's all the time we have on this 4th of July in the year 2017. Thank you for tuning in today to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I hope that you have a wonderful day for the rest of your Independence Day. Be kind to each other, love each other, and thank you.